Um, you've also made other films, Deathly Silence, that you produced for the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, your short documentaries on Chum Television's Sex TV. I want to see those. Your works appeared on various other television networks, including Much Music, TV One, Oxygen, Stars, Encore, BET, Vision TV, and the Sundance Channel. And in Canada, your very well-known reputation for powerful community-based documentaries, and that reputation is moving fast south. It's really wonderful. I think what I'll do is ask you each the question, and then we'll introduce the next person, and then do the question in a little bit of a different format. Tell us, if you would, a little bit about where you found the women to interview, how they're doing now, and some of the issues you had that we were talking about before in making the film. Please.
Well, first I want to thank the Canadian HIV Legal Network for bringing me into this project. It was just a pleasure working with them. And I also want to thank yourself for your film. I thought it was very powerful, and I love the fact that they're both here together, showing.
It's a great double bill, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think your film does a lot of stuff too. But the process of making this film was very tenuous, because we had this really crazy bill with the Supreme Court that was being tabled. And we didn't want to do anything that would put the women that were going to be in the film in jeopardy. We didn't want people showing up at the screening thinking, oh, they were going to, arrest people because what they were seeing in the film. So we had to tread very carefully in terms of selection. So we had the legal network was very involved in providing legal sort of guidance around who we should select in the film and what parts of the story we're allowed to talk about in the film. And I can just tell you stories about, we're on set and there's two lawyers, from the legal network, and we're getting into stuff, and it's like, no, don't go there. We can't go there, because one, we don't want someone arriving at your studio and taking footage because, they think that there might be more information that was not shown in the film. So it was trying. And then another aspect of making this film was in terms of the Black women in our community. I made another film about Black women living with HIV, and the amount of stigma and discrimination in that community was so horrific that we couldn't get other Black women to be in the film. So I decided to represent the women who cannot show their faces by the woman with the red scarf, and showing how the stigma and the discrimination kind of prevents certain voices coming to the table. What was the other part? Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to know, how are they doing now, and how has the reaction to the film been for those women who are in it?
Well, Jessica's here.
I know.
Jessica's here, so
she'll speak for herself.
But when I tend to make films for communities, or with communities, I should say, I tend to make the film and allow them to take it out into community and let it be their own film. Because, usually I'm on to other projects, but it is really, I try to make it in a way so that they can use it. And for the most part, I think they have been using it. It's crossed the country. I think we've had 50 screenings in Canada since it's debuted, and I think people are using it. Lynn, the woman, the First Nation woman, she's up north in northern Canada showing it in different communities. It's allowing her to be more vocal and not be afraid, because she was attacked. That wasn't even the first time she was attacked. That was the second time she was attacked. So this gave her a lot of courage to come out and talk about it. And Claudia, the Latina woman, I think she was doing some work with it out in her community, just, building awareness. But I think for a lot of the women, and I hope I'm right on this, Jessica, you can confirm or not, that it's been an empowering experience for them.
Great. Thank you. Uh, Richard Elliott is one of the really globally an icon in fighting for the legal rights of people with HIV and protecting. Sorry, it's true. I don't want to. He's Canadian, so he's modest. He's shy. He's embarrassed when I say these things, but it's really true. And the executive director of the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network. You produced this film, Positive Women, Exposing Injustice. You've been at the Legal Network for 18 years, and previously you worked as a lawyer in private practice. You appeared before at all levels of Ontario courts as well as the Supreme Court of Canada. And you helped guide the Legal Network's litigation in key HIV-related court cases in Canada and internationally. And the internationally, I want to say, is really important. The Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network's work has been very important to getting this work underway in the United States. Sorry, I don't mean to have my back to those of you over here. They have a terrific journal that they publish, the AIDS Policy Journal, and I'm really excited that this event is giving them opportunity to have a little more visibility in the U.S., and I'm hopeful that our double bill will travel in the U.S. a little bit, and I think Visual Aids and Broadway Cares and others are interested in seeing that happen. Richard, tell us, first, if you could explain some of the differences between the criminalization phenomenon in the U.S. and in Canada, because how we need to approach them are actually quite different as well, and your role with the Supreme Court case, I think, would be interesting too. Thank you.
Thanks for those over-the-top words. We're delighted to be here.
We're New Yorkers. We're over the top.
And we're really thrilled to be showing it here in New York. A couple of key differences that are relevant between the US and Canada. In Canada, we have one federal criminal code that is the criminal law across the country, as opposed to state-by-state criminal law here in the US. So in some sense, you might think that we only have one target, one body of law to deal with, whereas you have many more because it's 50 states and each have their own version of this. But in fact, we have this weird sort of jurisdictional split thing going on in Canada where it's federal law that is supposed to be the same across the country, but actually in each province and territory, it's actually provincial attorney general who's in charge of actually enforcing the criminal law. And so when we get bad federal law, which is unfortunately what we've got, well, even worse, federal law now, thanks to the Supreme Court decision you saw described at the end of the film there, we actually still have to work in many different jurisdictions to get attorneys general in each of those provinces to actually not go as far in the law as the Supreme Court has given them the green light to do. So a lot of energy now is going into prosecutorial guidelines work to try to get attorneys general at each jurisdictional level to adopt some guidelines for prosecutors to say, even though we can prosecute people, even if they use a condom, for example, or even if they have an undetectable or low viral load and don't use a condom, we have to try to convince them to not go that far and to actually show some restraint in the criminal law. And so we're similar in that respect, that we have to fight it jurisdiction by jurisdiction in a way. We had held out some hope that some of the inroads we were making in lower court decisions where we intervened, including the two cases that actually went up to the Supreme Court, one of whom is the case of Vienne from Montreal, who you saw. We were getting lower courts to actually accept our arguments about, condoms alone are sufficient. You don't have to disclose. You're not a criminal if you don't disclose, but you used a condom. Or if you have an undetectable or low viral load, the risk is not significant, and so therefore you're not a criminal if you don't disclose in that circumstance. And we actually had lower courts going in that direction until the Supreme Court threw a wrench in the works and now has set us back quite a few years, unfortunately. But that's why we have to do the prosecutorial guidelines work now. It's interesting that in this most recent court case, the first court case we had in 1998 was the first time we got out of the Supreme Court. We were there intervening, and that's where we opened up this little hope that at least condoms, for example, might be a defense, a sort of safer sex defense to these criminal charges. And we got, as I say, a bunch of lower courts to accept that. Now the Supreme Court has gone back even on that. But in a way, it could have been even worse, if you can believe it, because we had a number of provincial attorneys general showing up in front of the court saying, we want the criminal law to impose a blanket disclosure obligation. You must always disclose your HIV positive status. It doesn't matter what the risk is, even if it's infinitesimal, even if it's zero. There is no consent to have sex with a person who's HIV positive unless they have told you that they're HIV positive. Throw the science out the door. They didn't go quite that far, but they went some way down that path. So I think what it shows us is the importance of using the science as advocates, but not to over-rely on the science, because even when you put the good science to the courts, there's such an overwhelming degree of stigma and panic and fear still on the parts of judges that not all of that is actually going to get through. And so we also have to, I think, bring the stories of the injustice that actually follows when you have really crude, overly broad law in place to humanize it a bit, and that's part of what we wanted to do with this film, which we tried to get the judges to watch a couple of days before the court hearing, but of course they wouldn't come to the event because they were about to hear a court case. So we tried to get it to some of their interns for each of the judges so that maybe they could slip it to them behind the scenes.
Yeah, and just talking about the science can almost not matter in these things. We see this again and again. There still is not a single documented case of transmission from someone who has an undetectable viral load, sexual transmission. In all the scientific literature, there's not a single case. There's one suspect case, but it ultimately relies on the word of somebody that they had previously been negative. And yet courts aren't persuaded by that in the vast literature.
And sometimes you need to get to the prosecutors, because we actually have cases now pending before the courts that we're trying to derail where people are being prosecuted just for oral sex.
Yeah.
There are a couple of cases that we know of in Ontario now where we're trying to work with a defense lawyer. So unless we get to those decision makers about the actual crime attorneys who are going to take these cases forward, we're still going to see these things happening, and people are going to get dragged through the system. So we have to attack it at multiple fronts.
We have statutes in the U.S. that I don't know that they've been applied this way, but they would they make it a crime for mutual masturbation, for use of sex toy, all sorts of other things that don't even involve physical contact. Right. Yeah. Willie Campbell's serving 35 years in Texas for spitting at a cop. Jessica Whitbread.
Thank you.
I'll be the white bread on this stage.
I've had a white head before.
Oh,
It's evolving.
Jessica is a community organizer and activist and artist focusing on issues of gender and sexuality. During the day, you're the project coordinator at the Canadian Treatment Access Council, and at night, a fierce member of the group AIDS Action Now, whose work has reached here, partly through Ted Kerr, sending out some of your great posters and things. But especially exciting to me is that you're the new global chair of the International Community of Women with HIV and AIDS, which is really exciting. And tell us a little bit about why you decided to do this, what the experience was like for you, and maybe start with you were in New York for another reason this week that is quite relevant. Tell us why you're here besides sharing the evening with us.
Yeah, okay. So first I want to give a shout out to the other ICW members and the positive women who are here and that are in New York because it's the Commission on the Status of Women happening at the UN, and I don't know, you're like fighting the good fight and you're amazing and you live with this every day. So I know I might be speaking up here, but like I know that you do this work. We're sisters. Okay, so anyway, yeah, so it's the Commission on the Status of Women for the next 2 weeks at the UN. And I found it was so amazing when you guys called me and you're like, yeah, we booked the date for New York. And I was like, great. I'm also going for CSW. And we're actually here, ICW is basically trying to, the theme of this CSW is gender-based violence, and this is a perfect example of how HIV status increases the chance of you experiencing violence. So I kind of wish we could screen this in the General Assembly. I think that'd be cool. But anyway, yeah, so that's why I'm here. One of the reasons, but also the reason that I decided to take part in this film was because I think that I have a pretty unique perspective as someone whose partner, the person I got it from, was charged and convicted of 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault, one for transmitting it to another woman and another for just, I guess, non-disclosure, like the risk of, because she didn't test positive. And in my case, like, so it's weird. It was someone like I sat on the other side and I watched the whole thing go down, and I am constantly like, I'm pretty white, so you can tell that. I grew up in the suburbs. I'm not like the stereotypical like person you see in the media who's living with HIV. And I know that sounds weird and bad, but it's true. Like, everyone always labels me as this innocent victim. I go to hospitals. They're like, I'll tell them I'm HIV positive. They won't listen to me. They'll be like, why are you here? You should. And I was like, oh, God, HIV, like, you know. So I think that, like, for me, a big thing is kind of breaking down that the idea of innocent victims and innocence in this, like, because I took part in. I'm part of like what happened to me in my HIV status, and I think that like by labeling like people like innocent, it also says that someone else is guilty, right? And I just wanted to like change that up a bit. I don't know. I feel like I have so many answers. Every time I tell this, it's different. That's the one I'm going with today. Yeah. Like I really felt for like your story, you know, and I was just like, I can't. Being someone who's living with HIV, like, and it doesn't matter like which side of the court. Like, very easily I could be on either side. So I've been on one. There's a good chance I'll be on the other, and that freaks me out.
Okay. Thank you. Robert Suttle and I met just about 2 years ago, and sometimes we've been working together. He's the assistant director of the Sarah Project, and every once in a while someone comes up to me and says, where did you find Robert? He is fantastic. And I tell him, I didn't find Robert. Robert found me. I was driving on a road trip with my partner, and the phone rang, and answered it, and this sort of tentative voice said, well, I just got out of prison. I was convicted under Louisiana's HIV criminal transmission statute, and of course, which has nothing to do with transmission. Transmission is rarely the case in these prosecutions in the U.S., maybe less than 5% of the time. But he said, and I found something about you online. I found your phone number, that you're working on this. He didn't even know there was a name for the phenomenon, HIV criminalization. This was a couple of years ago. He said, I want to help. I have a background in the courts. I could maybe do legal research. I'd stuff envelopes, whatever it is that you need. And I'm like, you know, I was like, I'd been looking for someone like this. So I think I might have even said, oh my God, I've been looking for you. And I said, gosh, when did he get out of prison? Thinking he'd say, you know, a month ago, 2 months ago. He said, Monday. It was less than 48 hours from when he got out of prison. And later he told me, and then just the incredible coincidence is Javier and I were driving in Louisiana, and on a long road trip, and he was about half an hour away when he called. And later, when we got to know each other a bit, Robert told me that when he was coming home from prison, he was thinking about how he needed a new life plan. And he remembered his grandfather, who was a deacon in their church, always used to say, your misery is your ministry. And he knew what his misery was, and he thought somewhere in here he needed to find his purpose and a role that he could do, somewhere he could find a ministry in this. And so, Robert, tell us how your ministry's been the last couple of years. It's been quite a time.
That is true. It's been incredible, and it's been fast, but it's definitely been worth it. I tell you, in just a short time, it's been worth it. And I know what I'm saying now, I'm not only speaking for myself, but I know I'm speaking also for Nick and Monique and Eddie, Edward Castro and Mark Hunter and Donald Bogardus and all the other survivors that are part of our Serial Survivors Network, the name I've given them. it has really been incredible that we've been able to have an opportunity or a platform and a way to speak about our experiences, because most people don't want to talk about this publicly. And I can say that through, people ask, you know, what is Zero, or what does Zero do? I'm like, we are Zero, and this is how it came to be. It's because of people like us who experience this sort of injustice and discrimination here in the U.S. And so everything that Zero does, and that you've seen us do, is because that's what we want. This is how we feel comfortable and safe in being represented in the way that we are. And through this film, HIV is Not a Crime, has definitely opened the door for us to be able to speak and to share our stories. And in terms of the work that we've done, I mean, people are continuing to reach out and saying, hey, I saw that film, or I saw you in this article, you know, I read you guys' story. And we realize that it is making a difference, it's making an impact. So all the support that has been given to us, to our organization and around this effort, has really paid off, and is continuing to pay off. So we're very grateful for each and every person that has contributed to our organization, to this cause. And to those that are, however you're spreading the word about HIV criminalization and bringing it to life to people who would otherwise not know about it, it has definitely paid off, and it's continuing to pay off. And so we hope that you will continue to support us as we go forward and move forward to have these laws changed. But it has been very, let me just say, it hasn't been totally easy, because it's kind of, and I can say for me, because it's so personal. You know, I'm not just someone on the outside that's like, oh, that's, you know, that's a cause I want to be behind. I'm still living with this. I'm still living with the collateral consequences of this experience. And I gladly take it on, because I realize how vulnerable people living with HIV are, and they don't deserve to be treated in the ways that they are being treated. No one deserves this type of treatment. And I'm just glad to do my part as a person living with HIV, to be able to stand and speak out. And I'm glad that I'm able to do that through Zero, because I don't think I would have been able to do it in any other way. So I am very grateful that I've connected with Sean and others that are involved with Zero around this issue. Because I thought my life was over, and I was 30-something. I mean, I'm 34 now, but I was still at, you know, late 20s, crossing over to 30. And I'm like, I'm too young. My life, it can't be over. It cannot end this way. And so I believe that it's definitely divine fate that Sean and I have come together, and that by us coming together, we were able to create something, an organization, a platform for people who have experienced criminalization here in the U.S. And also glad to just connect with other people that, because of this, we've been able to connect with people all over the world, and to hopefully together we can continue to change the world in a more positive and manner that everybody has dignity and respect, no matter what type of HIV or disease status you have.
When Robert talks about how this is still with him, you obviously saw his driver's license, but in all sorts of ways. Just a couple of weeks ago, he was invited by the National Black Justice Coalition to join a briefing and a series of events, including an event at the White House. And the day before, he was called by the White House and said that he hadn't passed the security clearance, which fortunately able to get changed, and he was able to go to that. When he moved from Louisiana to a small town in Pennsylvania, where my partner and I live, and where our Cerro global headquarters is, he had to register in Pennsylvania as a sex offender, and I went with him to our state police office and sort of, you know, was a witness to that whole process. And a week later, in the small village of Milford, where we live, of 1,100 people, on a Thursday morning, our local police chief knocks on the front door of the house. Our office is right there. And the police chief is there in his uniform with his gun, with a flyer, a color photograph of Robert, you know, warning, Megan's Law, sex offender, and a clipboard. And he was going to, we're right in the middle of the village, to every house within several hundred feet, which was most of the village, every school and daycare center within a mile, every business, and we're right in the middle of the commercial district. He had to speak to the owners or managers of the businesses to warn them about this sex offender. He'd never had to do that before because of a peculiarity in Pennsylvania law that if you come in from another state, you're subject to this very high level of community notification, much more so than typical sex offenders. And it was pretty horrific, and was an issue in the community. And Robert decided to kind of deal with it head on and wrote something for a little local paper. And I wrote something as well, and they ran it in a weekly paper on Page 2, which is one of the very first instances that I know of someone was required to register as a sex offender, who kind of fought back in a public forum and tried to educate people about how wrong this was. With that, I think we're going to go to question and answer. But before we go to question and answer, because I know we'll start to lose some people, I want to mention a couple of things that people can do to be helpful with this. First, go to the websites, the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network and SARO Project. You can sign up for our email lists and so on and be kept informed of activities. You can also go to the website of the Center for HIV Law and Policy, which coordinates the Positive Justice Project, which has a series of work groups that work on various aspects of this issue. A lot of professionals and policy people and others that do that. But the most important thing, the very most important thing, is to engage people in this conversation. This is not an easy issue for people to grasp. It's really complicated, it's nuanced, and I find most people need to engage in the issue 2 or 3 times before they start to understand why it's wrong to create law around one specific virus, around an immutable characteristic. You know, most people think it's not a very good idea to create laws around other immutable characteristics, different laws for people based on their skin color or their gender or their sexual orientation or their genetic makeup or their physical ability or disability. Most people don't think it's a very good idea to have different laws for different groups, but here we're creating a viral underclass in the law, a class of citizen whose rights are inferior to others. And we're doing it just with HIV. There are other sexually transmitted diseases which, if left untreated, can seriously harm someone or even kill someone. Hepatitis, HPV. More women died of cervical cancer last year in the US than died of AIDS. Almost every single one of them got it from HPV, human papillomavirus strains of HPV, which lead to cervical cancer. But we don't create an HPV criminal transmission statute. HIV is stigmatized because it's associated with an outlaw sexuality. It's associated with people of color, with gay men, with anal intercourse, with people who use drugs, and it's become sort of a repository for legislators and the public's sort of fears and anxieties. So engaging people in this conversation, it isn't about being for or against or on one side or the other. It's about being really well informed.